Today we'll talk more about how we can utilize Azure DNS. So when we talk about Azure DNS, we need to understand what is the DNS in itself. So the domain name system is responsible for translating or resolving a website or service to its service name to its IP address. So this is what fundamentally happens, and almost all of you should be aware about this, like how a website name is translated into its original IP address of the server which is hosting the web page that you are seeing on your browser. So Azure DNS, what it does, it provides a hosting service for your DNS domains. So it provides name resolution using Microsoft Azure infrastructure. So what Microsoft is doing, it is giving you a global infrastructure available for your DNS. And it has actually implemented DNS servers across all its data centers across the world. And it's not something where you can register your domain. You need to register your domain separately with a registrar. But after you have registered your domain, you can use Azure's infrastructure to utilize the name servers and its bandwidth to host your services like DNS on Azure itself. So by hosting your domains in Azure, you can manage your DNS. Means you don't need to go to the your registrar's domain page to manage your DNS. You can manage everything in your Azure portal, Azure DNS zone itself. First thing you need to do, you just need to delegate permissions to your to Azure to manage your domain for you. So Azure DNS also supports private DNS domains. So like you can use local domains as well for your virtual networks and your on-premise setup as well. So this is a simple flow here. It's very obvious, like how we create a request, like a user is creating a request here and hitting this URL, and Azure DNS in the background will do all the work, and it will translate this domain name to a particular IP address. So how it does, we'll try to understand that, and ultimately you will get a IP address of the page of the server that is hosting that website with all the pages, and the user will get that IP address, and then it will connect directly to the resource. It can be a VM, it can be a web app, or it can be many other things, but fundamentally it will have your website hosted inside that infrastructure. So if we talk about what Azure DNS offers in terms of what all features are there, so fundamental things like you can see here, reliability and performance. So we are talking about Azure. With Azure and cloud of this scale, you get reliability and performance highly optimized. So DNS domains in Azure DNS are hosted on Azure's global network of DNS name servers. So like how it is managed, that's taken care of by Microsoft. But you, whenever you create a DNS zone in Azure portal, you get a set of name servers for all the domains, like 4 name servers. Now for every DNS zone, they maintain a name server, and how they do it in the background, that is not something we should be like concerned about, but they manage it in the background so that wherever all across the world, your domain is highly available, and it means you can take benefit out of this global infrastructure that Azure is providing. So Azure DNS uses Anycast networking so that each DNS query is answered by the closest available DNS server. So based on where the request is originating from, Azure will ensure that by default, it will ensure that your users actually get the fastest response from the closest available DNS server. So that is just a relevant explanation of how you can actually enhance the performance. So since Azure provides very healthy and robust infrastructure, so your users can actually utilize that to get better performance. So this provides both fast performance and high availability for your domain. So which is actually an inherent feature for anything that is in Azure. So when you start using DNS from Azure, again, it becomes obvious that you can utilize that as well. So seamless integration, the Azure DNS service can be used to manage DNS records for your Azure services and can be used to provide DNS for your external resources as well. So within the Azure infrastructure offering like VMs and web apps, you can use Azure DNS, which is already being used by Azure. Like when you create a VM, it is getting an IP address, private IP address, and it is getting a public IP address if you choose to do so. All that is managed by the Azure DNS, that public IP address and the resolution of that name of the VM that you get to the IP address in the background. All that is happening in the background using Azure DNS. That is by default, but you can customize it as well. Because whenever we create a VM, we don't need to create a DNS server explicitly to begin with. We can do so to manage it inside a, we can manage a different VM. Inside that, we can have a DNS tool and we can manage everything as a using that DNS server. But by default, if you don't have that requirement, Azure DNS maintains everything in terms of name resolution and management. So you can do it for your Azure services as well as for your external resources as well, outside of Azure, maybe your on-premise setup. So this is something about integrating with your Azure as well as non-Azure services. And when we talk about security, the Azure DNS service is based on Azure Resource Manager. So again, when you use anything in Azure, you get all the inherent features out of it. So role-based access control, the Azure Active Directory management. So all the things which make Azure highly secure are available in Azure DNS as well. So you will get this feature in ARM model, not in classic model. So with ARM, you get inherent security features enabled for Azure DNS as well. Your domain and records can be managed via the Azure portal, Azure PowerShell commandlets, and the cross-platform Azure CLI. So again, this is also very obvious. You can actually programmatically access it using PowerShell or CLI, and you can directly go to the portal and you can manage your DNS entries on the portal itself. So this is something quite generic, not related to Azure itself. So this is a little overview about what a domain is. So the domain name system is a hierarchy of domains. So the hierarchy starts from the root domain. So we means, I think you all must be familiar with it. So the dot represents the root domain, and you can have different top level domains like com, net, org, UK, or JP for Japan. So different geographies or different kind of organization types, you can have different top level domains. And then there is a second level domain that is specific to your like organization type, especially here org.ok UK and co.jp. So they're like root domain, top level domain, second level domain, and then you have further sub level domains. So the domains in the DNS hierarchy are globally distributed, hosted by DNS name servers around the world. So it's not as if without Azure DNS you don't have access to any DNS name servers. It's already there. When you register a domain, you get a set of name servers assigned to your domain, and those name servers actually host your DNS entries and your domain. So it's not like it's not available before Azure DNS, but yes, Azure DNS is a good option to opt for when you start utilizing Azure as a complete resource for all your IT needs. So you can use Azure DNS as well. So a domain name registrar is an organization that allows you to purchase a domain name such as contoso.com. So this is not, Microsoft is not a domain name registrar as of yet, like in terms of Azure. So you need to purchase it from somewhere else. But that domain name registrar will actually help you with purchasing a particular domain name. And Azure DNS provides a globally distributed high availability name server infrastructure, which you can use to host your domain. So this is in a sense telling you what exactly Azure DNS is. It is actually a set of name server infrastructure that is available globally, and it is highly available, and you can use it to host your domains. By hosting your domains in Azure DNS, you can manage your DNS record directly in Azure itself. So you don't need to keep on going to your domain name registrar domain page and manage things there. You can do it here itself. Azure DNS does not currently support purchasing of domain names. If you want to purchase domains, you need to use a third-party domain name registrar, so which I have iterated many times.
So let's say I'm setting up a company and my company is abc.com. So I have purchased the abc.com from godaddy.com.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, now I want to create a website and I want to host that. And for that, I want to use the Azure infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
So, so how I'm going to use that particular name, that abc.com, by that I can get my website access, which I have hosted on that.
I've created a few like DNS zones entries in the Azure portal. So you can create it like you can type DNS and you can find an entry for like DNS zones here, or you can go to create a resource and you can find DNS zones here. So it's very easy to create a DNS zone in Azure. So what you do when you click on plus here, you need to provide the name of your domain. So suppose you have a domain already purchased from GoDaddy abc.com, you will give it as abc.com. So right now it will not validate whether I own abc.com or not. So I can create it right away and it will not stop me from creating it. I can create it like this. So now this DNS zone is registered in my Azure portal inside an Azure resource group. And it assumes that I have access ownership over this domain. But in order to make it working, because this is not like something which will start working by itself. In order to make it work, you will have to go to your domain name registrar, and inside here, you will have to update the name server entries here. And once you do that, you can actually change it here, and you can enter the Azure DNS domain name server entries here, and that will actually delegate the permission and for Azure that you are the owner for this domain, and then you can start managing all the records inside the Azure itself. So you can create new record sets for your domain, and you can manage everything from here itself, if you can see. So this is a simple like overview. It's not in detail. I'm planning to set up like a live environment where I can actually point an actual website to using this service and show it working. So this is a simple demonstration how you will actually integrate your actual domain to Azure DNS Zone. Does it make it clear?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. So means this is just a beginning. There's a lot more to it, but yeah, in simple terms, you can simply point these name servers to your inside your domain name registrars page, and that will integrate. So this is what we actually saw in the Azure portal right now. So this domain concept is quite generic. It's not specific to Azure. We use it in so many ways every time when we hit the browser. And DNS zone is something like inside the Azure. It's all outside Azure as well, but in reference to Azure DNS, DNS zone is the way we manage Azure DNS. Like we create our own entries in Azure DNS using DNS zones. So this is how we actually manage our domain inside Azure DNS. So a DNS zone is used to host the DNS records for a particular domain. So like, as we said, abc.com. So you can create a DNS zone with abc.com, and you can configure the name servers, and you can start creating records and managing everything with Azure DNS itself. So what it does, it actually provides you a set of infrastructure in the background. You pay a price for it. We'll discuss about pricing in the end, but it's not a big kind of a price. It depends on how much you're consuming. You will start paying on that basis. So to start hosting your domain in Azure DNS, you need to create a DNS zone for that domain name. Each DNS record for your domain is then created inside this DNS zone. So first for the domain, you create a DNS zone, and then as I showed you, you can start creating DNS record for your domain inside this DNS zone. So an example is here, like the domain contoso.com may contain several DNS records, such as mail.contoso.com for a mail server and www.contoso.com for a website. So once you register your domain using a DNS zone in Azure DNS, you can start configuring the records for that particular domain, and you can have a mail.contoso.com for your mail server, and similarly for a website you can have www.contoso.com. So this is very simple, but this is how it actually gets implemented in Azure. So when creating a DNS zone in Azure DNS, there are certain things you need to keep in mind. So there are certain limitations, not in terms of how much you can create, but how you create it in Azure. So the name of the zone must be unique within the resource group, and the zone must not exist already. So what it is trying to say is that suppose you have a resource group, suppose ipdemo rg01, you have a DNS zone already created inside that resource group abc.com. Now you cannot register abc.com again in that same resource group. So the second line makes it even clearer. The same zone name can be reused in a different resource group or a different Azure subscription. So if I have another resource group in the same subscription, ipdemo rg02, I can create abc.com as a DNS zone there in that resource group. So it allows you to do that. So you would be now trying to understand how it allows to do that, and if it allows, how it works in the background. So I think the third line explains that. So where multiple zones share the same name, each instance is assigned different name server addresses. You see ns1-04 azure-dns.com. So this is a name server for .com, and similarly for other top level domains. So if I create ipdemo.com inside this resource group rg03, and inside rg02 I can create ipdemo.com, but again it will have a different set of name servers, but I cannot create ipdemo.com in the same resource group rg03. So this is what it is trying to tell here. So only one set of addresses can be configured with the domain name registrar. So this is very obvious, even though you might be able to register the same domain in two different resource groups and have different set of name servers. With your domain name registrar, you can configure it only for one DNS zone, because it won't allow you to configure it with two name server records, two name server entries. Okay, I hope this is clear. So inside like DNS zone, you will create DNS records. So the records are are specified by using relative names. Okay, a fully qualified domain name FQDN includes the zone name, where a relative name does not. So the example will make it clearer. So the relative record name www in the zone contoso.com gives the fully qualified record name www.contoso.com. So a relative name would be like a www, and if you talk about fully qualified record name, it would be www.contoso.com, where contoso.com is the DNS zone name. So this is just an overview, like how you actually name your records. So if you are naming like a you want a name for your website, you will create a www record, and its relative name will be www, and FQDN will have the entire DNS zone integrated with it. So what all types of record types we can have in Azure DNS? We can see that in the last line, but in essence, a DNS record has a name and a type. So it's very obvious. So as you can see, the last line, there are so many types of DNS records you can create, and then you assign a name to it. So records are organized into various types according to the data they contain. We will actually see in the next slide quite detailed description of different record types. So different record types actually pertain to different services or data that they contain. The most common type is an A record, which maps a name to an IPv4 address. So this is something we use quite commonly. And another common type is an MX record, which maps a name to a mail server. So this must also be very familiar. Azure DNS supports all common DNS record types. So A, quadruple A, CA, CNAME, MX, NS, PTR, SOA, SRV, and TXT. So there are so many types of DNS records. People who actually manage DNS servers must be very familiar with these things. So here is a little description to what all record types are in general, not only in reference to Azure DNS. So this will give you a better idea if you don't already have it. So a record type of A refers to an IPv4 set of version of IP addresses, and quadruple A is for IPv6 version of IP addresses. So in any case, both of these record types do the same function. They map a host name For example, here adatem.com to an IP address. So it can be any IP address which would belong to a particular server or infrastructure that is hosting your website. So it's simple. This record actually does the task of mapping a host name to an IP address, which is what we do most of the times when we hit a web browser. And CNAME record canonical name is actually used to assign a custom name, like suppose here ftp.adatem.com to a host record such as host1.adatem.com. So CNAME record is also very commonly used. It's like when we configure load balancers, when we configure traffic manager, we don't want our users to see the actual name of that actual URL that Azure provides. We want to wrap it with a custom domain. So in order to wrap an existing domain with another like set of a friendly URL, you can use CNAME records, and you can point that friendly name that you have to the actual service that is hosting the infrastructure or whatever service you're using. So CNAME records are also used very commonly. The MX record is also a very common type of record that we use whenever we configure email services, especially Exchange. So it points to the host that accepts email for the domain. So your MX records must point to an A record and not to a CNAME record. So it is used when you configure email services and especially Exchange server. So there you mention the MX record and you point it to a particular A record which will have a particular IP address assigned for the Exchange server that you're pointing to. So NS is very common that we have seen here as well. So name servers contains the name of a server hosting a copy of the entire DNS zone. So if we go to the portal, you see these set of name servers for different top level domains. So what it is doing is it is actually hosting the entire copy of this DNS zone inside these servers. So right now they have only NS and SOA records to begin with, but in future you will add more records and all those records will be hosted in these name servers. So SOA is start of authority that we saw like is by default, and it provides information about the writable copy of the DNS zone, including its location and version number. So if we go here, we see a lot of information here. Yeah. So if you see here, it's giving the entire email here, which is referencing to this, and the host, which is one of the name servers here, and the refresh time, retry time, expiry time, and all the metadata information. So this is something which is there by default, and it actually refers to your DNS zone. So SRV records are another kind of records which actually point to hosts that are providing specific services such as session initiation protocol SIP or ADDS Active Directory Domain Services. So these are the whole point is like all these records are actually meant for different services. So this is not something specific to Azure. It's like generally available, and the point is all this is available in Azure, and we can start using it to manage our domains and manage our services which we use those domains for. And the last one is TXT, which is a simple, it contains custom text and it's a text record. These are the general record types for managing DNS anywhere. So what is a registrar? A domain registrar is a company who can provide internet domain names. So they verify if the internet domain you want to use is available and allow you to purchase it, which is obvious. And once the domain name is registered, you are the legal owner for the domain for the specified time you have purchased it for. And if you already have an internet domain, you will use the current domain registrar to delegate to Azure DNS, which I showed you, like you can start pointing it to the name servers of Azure. So in Azure DNS, you have the option of using private domains as well. Azure DNS is a hosting service, which we have understood very clearly for DNS domains. In addition to internet-facing DNS domains, Azure DNS now also supports private DNS domains. So you can have the public domains. Along with that, you can have private DNS domains as well. The third line is very important because this is something which is by default and we never realize that. So Azure DNS resolve domain names in a virtual network without the need to add a custom DNS solution. So whenever we create any VM or any other infrastructure in a virtual network, we don't have to manually create a custom DNS solution or have a DNS server in place in the virtual network to manage all the DNS entries and the name resolution. So this happens by default, and Azure DNS is actually managing it in the background. So private DNS zones allow you to use your own custom domain names rather than the Azure provided names. So this is something you can actually build over. So instead of using the names that Azure provides for your VMs, you can start using your own custom domain names. And how useful it's going to be for you, we'll try to understand that in the next slide. But yes, you can start doing that as well. It provides name resolution for VMs within a virtual network and between virtual network. Yes, it will start doing that. It's happening right now as well, but you can use private DNS zones as well. Additionally, you can configure zone names with a split horizon view, allowing a private and a public DNS zone to share the same name. So in the next slide, we'll discuss a little more about split horizon view. So what it is trying to say here is same DNS zone name can be used privately as well as publicly. So all the traffic that is coming from our virtual network uh, will be treated as private, and all coming from internet will be as public.